Hello. Sorry for, extending last week's video for such a long time. I feel like I talked at the end way longer than I needed to. Um, but that video was kind of just an honest, like, it was just where I was in the moment. So I decided to upload it. I considered not uploading it and redoing it, but I didn't have the energy to, if I'm being honest. But this week I want to talk about something a little bit more uplifting. I feel like I was talking about a lot of stuff that would bum you out last week, and I want to give you advice on how to be happy this week because that's useful. So I wrote down some things that I know are helpful, but there's more to it, and that's why there's more than just reading it. There's a video to go along with it. So let's see what I wrote. As humans, we're basically vessels of energy, and we need to be mindful of what we're putting out and taking in. Be careful of what you spend your time thinking about, who you spend your time around, and any other factors that may be contributing to a depletion of energy. Having things around you that are using a lot of electricity will also deplete your energy, so mind how often your TV is on and limit your phone time. Music that makes you want to dance is a good way to restore your energy, as well as eating healthier foods. And I feel like I was going to write more, but I said, you know what, that sums it up. Anything else that I want to say, I can say in the video. So that's more of the, scientific stuff, but there's a lot more to it than that. I always end up talking about philosophy and spirituality and stuff in all my videos, even though they're not all about that, they're connected. So every time I do a video, I end up talking about those things anyway, and that's what makes them so long. So let's see. Sorry about that. Anyway, so the first thing I want to elaborate on is the foods. Eating healthier foods. What does that mean? Well, it doesn't have to mean removing anything that is perceived as unhealthy from your diet completely and replacing it with only things that are perceived as healthy in general. But you do have to keep a little bit of a limit on how much sugar and dairy you're consuming. Dairy and sugar specifically are really bad for your immune system. So try to limit that. Maybe like if you are someone who eats a lot of junk food or doesn't really eat a lot of healthy food, maybe like have 2 healthy meals a day and then one something that you would like for dinner at the end of the day. It's just something like that so that you don't feel like you're completely depriving yourself of food that you like. And then maybe you'll wean off of it completely, but you don't ever have to, because honestly, it's up to you. You just shouldn't have a ton of it and constantly. But a lot of people do. A lot of people have really horrible diets, and it is definitely a contributing factor to their mood. And the way that I think of it is just to their energy, because that's just the way that I see things. But another thing people do all the time, they're constantly on their phones, and people don't realize that when you have a bunch of things that are actively using electricity, it's okay to have things plugged in because it's not really using that much. But I honestly, if you can unplug them, whatever you're doing, if you have to just be aware of what's around you, and you're connected to electricity. You have, you know, it's part of what you are. And I don't know if I'm making sense saying that, but it's just that's why you have to be careful about having that on. Like if you're in a house where the TV is constantly on, that's going to drain you. And if you only turn the TV on for like a couple hours a day, or less than that, you're going to notice a difference. And having the devices plugged in and having them on is a different thing because they're using a lot more energy when they're on, but they're still using some when they're plugged in. So, like I said, if you can unplug them, it's up to you, but you don't have to. But and you don't have to do any of this. These are just things that you should be aware of that do play a part in the depletion of your energy. So you don't want to be depleted of energy. That's how you get exhausted. That's how you get depressed, and that's why you are trying to find a way to be happy, because the other thing is, I'm kind of going backwards through this, spending time around people who are not really doing their job. Like I said, you need to be mindful of what you're putting out and taking in. And there are a lot of people, I want to say most people, honestly, aren't really thinking about the kind of energy that they're putting out into the world, and they're also not monitoring what they're taking in. And you wouldn't expect to eat 10 hamburgers and not gain any weight. You wouldn't expect to drink 10 bottles of water and not have to pee. Like, you have to think about what you're putting into your body when it comes to food, when it comes to the things that are around you, whether it's literally electricity and TVs and your phone and stuff like that, or not even for the electricity aspect of your phone, but just using your phone as something to like get lost in, where you're like scrolling through mindlessly and you're kind of using it as a distraction because you don't want to focus on what you might have to do to fix your problems, because you've drained your energy. You don't have the energy to put any effort into fixing your problems, so you would rather just distract yourself from your problems. But the reason that you don't have any energy to fix your problems is because of your problems. So it's kind of like a loop. So you have to find a way to do it that you're not overwhelmed by, but you have to focus on it. You have to at least acknowledge it on some level, so that way you're not doing nothing, and then the problem just gets worse. But and it's at your own expense. So be careful of what you spend your time thinking about. That was another thing. Like, if you're sitting around thinking about all the things that you have to do, all your worries, all your things of, not even just like this week, but in your life, like, what am I doing? Like, if you remember a time in your life when you didn't have big fears because your parents were kind of taking care of that for you, and all you really had to worry about was showing up for school and getting your homework done, or whatever it was that was in your childhood where you didn't have to worry. And think about how you felt then, when you weren't really like stressed out with a bunch of responsibilities or presumed responsibilities, and think about how you feel when you're thinking about all those other things. Like, are you thinking about things that stress you out? And are you thinking about them realistically? Because we don't often think about things realistically, because we think, okay, well, now my parents are not taking care of this for me, it's my job. But we forget about God, we forget about faith, we forget about the universe, and we forget that we're part of something bigger, that we're still being supported, and that we don't have to worry about everything all at once. So, it's sort of like your parents in that time in your childhood were channeling God, and now that you're old enough, and you should be mature enough by now, to the point where you're like, unless you're a kid watching this, but if you're an adult, then you can imagine, like, you're at a point now where your parents have kind of stepped out of that role, and now it's just you and your relationship with the universe itself, and that's within you. Now it's your job to take on that role instead of your parents. So it's sort of like how your parents carry you until you can walk for yourself. Eventually you have to do it yourself, but it's not that you're doing it alone. It's just that now the your parents are working within you. So you don't have to feel like they left you by yourself. They just relocated to something inside you, and you just have to find that and kind of relocate that feeling of trust, if that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, ask questions in the comments. Let me know what I can. Don't let me know what I can say. Just let me know what you didn't understand. um, and the other thing is who you spend your time around. So if you're hanging around a lot of people who are just not really taking a lot of accountability for what they're putting out. Like they walk into the room with this like heavy toxic energy, or they walk into the room with this like high anxious energy, or whatever it is, whatever they're bringing into the room, that suddenly everyone else feels it and the whole vibe shifts. There's no question. Like everyone in the room knows that you were all feeling one way and now this person enters and you're feeling a different way. If you're hanging around a lot of people like that, and not even like just that situation, like there are all sorts of situations where you're around people and they're just not thinking too much about how what they're doing is making other people feel. they're they're not thinking at all about that, really. They're all like wrapped up in their own heads, and there isn't a lot of like stopping, and there's not a lot of empathy. And if you're hanging around people who aren't empathetic, who aren't actively using empathy to consider what's going on around them, that means that they're not being responsible for what they put out, which also means they're not being responsible for what they take in, and they're probably dealing with the same problem. And they probably have a victimhood mentality, and complain a lot about issues that they're causing to other people, and they just don't realize that they're doing the same thing that they're complaining about. They're like completely unaware hypocrites. And not all of them are this bad. You might have people who only have one of these things that's true about them, but then there's people who are like a combination of all these traits, and you can't like generalize anything. You have to really take everything on a situation, a case by case basis. And that's why it's important to just be mindful of what's around you, because it's not always going to be the same. You're not always going to be able to, like go back to this and say, all right, was this type of situation or this type of person mentioned in this video? Like it's different every time. So just think about it and say, what do I feel? How do I feel after I'm around this person, or how does thinking about this make me feel? Just think about these things. Think about what you're thinking about, who you're spending your time around, and what they're really giving back to you. Is it a mutual friendship, or are they just kind of taking your time and your energy and they're not really giving much back? Or are they using guilt somehow to keep you around? And what they're really doing in doing that is taking away your own sense of peace and your own sense of power, because they're making you feel like you're not an individual with the right to make your own decisions. They're making you feel like you owe them things, and they're kind of taking advantage of your empathetic nature, which is what they're not doing at all. And you don't owe anyone anything. If someone isn't being empathetic to you, why should you be empathetic to them? And the other thing is, a good way to tell is if you're hanging around people and you notice them doing a lot of things that you like. Treat people the way that you want to be treated is the golden rule. That's what I learned in kindergarten. They said treat people the way you want to be treated. But what if you started treating people the way people treated you? Would you feel guilty? Would you feel like you were doing something cruel or something unnecessarily hurtful by treating people the way they treat you? And if you feel like you couldn't treat people the way they treat you, then maybe you need to hang around different people. Because treating people the way they treat you should always mean being kind and empathetic and understanding and authentic, not pretending to be something else, or like over giving and stuff like that. And on the flip side of that, you could picture someone who's constantly giving and giving and giving. But then think about it. Would you take from people? If you were around someone who was as giving as you, would you feel good taking from them? Or would you feel like you were taking advantage of someone who didn't have healthy boundaries? So that's how you that's how you maintain the balance. You think like, would I take from someone if they were doing what I'm doing? Or would I treat someone like that if they were, what they're doing to me? Would I do that to someone? So that's how you make sure that you're not going too far in either direction, if that makes sense. Um, so yeah, the other thing, the main thing that I want to talk about is the importance of having some kind of faith in something. I mentioned like God and stuff. You have to think about what you believe in the world. Otherwise, things are just going to feel, they're always going to feel chaotic. And what you spend your time thinking about is likely going to be unrealistic worries. Because what are worries if nothing matters? If nothing matters, if you believed that the world was going to end tomorrow and nothing was going to last afterwards, like you don't believe that the world's going to end and you're going to go to heaven or hell. You don't believe the world's going to end and something else is going to happen. Like you just think tomorrow is the end of existence. After that, there's nothing anywhere. No heaven, no hell, like nothing for everyone. It's all just gone. So then, if that's the case, and today's the last day, then absolutely nothing matters. So then all the things that you're worrying about become meaningless. And then you kind of have to reevaluate what matters and what you actually want and what's important to you. And that's what you should be doing anyway. Just imagine that your worries aren't there. And then when you do that, you're going to realize that without faith in something, there's no reason for anything. Because if you really believe that there's nothing, if you believe that, you know, there's nothing more than what you see is what you get, then you kind of have to weigh into the belief that there was a time that the universe didn't exist and that there will eventually be a time when it doesn't anymore, because you understand that everything that's alive is going to die and everything that ever lived is dead, and that kind of takes away any kind of value from life. And then you just think about Earth and you think about how everything is constantly changing and decaying. It's moving toward its end. And then you're like, okay, well, what's the point of anything? But people don't usually think about that, or they don't draw that conclusion from thinking about it. Because I think if you really truly drew the conclusion that nothing mattered, you probably wouldn't stick around, unless part of you, some small part of you, believed that something does matter, that there is something worth sticking around for. Or part of you was maybe afraid of, what if I check out and I was wrong and then I get in trouble for it? Like, there's all sorts of things that people have, but I feel like there are a lot of people who decide that nothing matters and they actually do kill themselves. And I wanted to do a video on suicide at some point. I was going to do it today, but I decided to not do it today because I just came from a kind of depressing video last week, and I wanted to do something more uplifting this week, and that's kind of a dark topic. So, I want you to know that whatever you believe, it doesn't change, it doesn't change the fact that you're here and that you matter. So I also don't want you to feel like, if you know someone who killed themselves, or if you've ever considered it yourself, I don't want you to feel any guilt, and I don't want you to feel bad for anybody, because sometimes people they do what they need to do. And it doesn't have to be good or bad, it just is like, nothing in life is really inherently good or bad. What makes things good or bad is the energy that we put into it. Because it's, I really think of positive and negative energy, or light and dark energy, as just full versus lack of. Because dark energy, what it really is starving. It's missing the energy, and it's in need of it, which is why it's so chaotic, and it doesn't have any rules. It doesn't have any kind of faith in anything, because it's missing that light. It's missing something that makes it whole, and it's gonna try and find something to power it. So if you don't believe in God, you don't have to believe in any version of God. God is whatever you want God to be. Like, all you need God to be is whatever makes you feel that something is on your side, that you're always going to be supported. And God is whatever makes you feel how your parents were supposed to make you feel in the first years of your life as you were growing up, when you felt like they would take care of all your troubles for you, and all you had to do was trust them and do what they told you. And some people don't get that experience. Some people come into the world and right away their parents are neglecting them, or they don't have parents, or whatever. There's all sorts of situations, but ideally you can have a childhood where you feel like that for at least some amount of time, that your parents are taking care of things for you, that there's at least one person in your life who you can trust, and whatever they tell you to do, you know that it's for you, and you can just trust them to worry about the details for you. And that's what God is supposed to be. So whatever that means to you. And you can give God a name, a personality, a gender. It's up to you, but you need something, because without that, you're gonna feel like there's no reason to do anything, and you're gonna be really stressed out. You're gonna be thinking about things that you have no business thinking about, and that's not good. So if you want to be happy, that's something you're gonna have to learn, is to have faith. So the other thing is, just learn about like spirituality in general. Try getting into it. But the main important thing that we need to remember is something. I was going to do a separate video on this, but I might just squeeze it in at the end here. Imagine a scenario where, the idea of you're supposed to love yourself and not care what anyone else thinks, no matter what you look like, no matter who you are, no matter where you are. You're supposed to look in the mirror and love what you see and love yourself, and not base your opinion of yourself on what other people think of you. But imagine a scenario where everyone in the world, not a single person is on your side. Everyone is attacking you. Everyone is calling you evil. Everyone is calling you ugly. Everyone is saying you deserve to die. You have no place here. You don't belong here. There's something wrong with you inherently, and there's nothing you can do about it. You suck and you should die. Technically, there is nothing stopping anyone from doing that. You could theoretically end up in a situation where everyone is doing that to you. But even on a smaller scale, you could be in a room filled with people, at a party filled with people who are doing that, in a group chat, in just one conversation with one person, and whatever it is, when someone, if it's the only person you're talking to at that moment, and you don't have anyone, beside you, backing you, it's gonna feel like it's all against you, and you have to decide in that moment, you have to decide in that moment if anyone, like, if you need someone to come save you, or if you feel like you should defend yourself on your own. Because what are your options, really, in that situation? Do you believe the horrible things people are saying about you just because there's no one on your side? Do you believe that everyone else is insane, and that you're the only one thinking clearly? And if, that's really your only two options. You either believe them or you don't believe them. But the problem is that we often do both. We often get into arguments defending ourselves, but we get into defense mode and we're not really thinking about what the people are saying. Excuse me. Sometimes what they're saying, there is some validity in it. Sometimes they're making good points, but there's never any way to justify being cruel or attacking someone. And sometimes the words people are using don't really match the energy that they're putting out. Like, someone can be clearly energetically being hostile and attacking you, but the words that they're saying are coming off, they're meant to come off as like constructive criticism or helpful in some way, or from a place of concern, or even just like people being passive aggressive. There's so many things people do that energetically read as an attack. And in nature, it would be like, an animal going like, like a weird little fight position. And animals are more expressive with their bodies physically, but it's in the energy too. We don't really do that with our bodies as much as we do just with energy. And people pick up on it. Sometimes it is in body language, and body language experts can tell. But sometimes the only way to really know what someone means energetically is to just feel it, to ask yourself, how does this make me feel? Because people can often say things that seem really nice and they're just not. and you know it. You don't know what's not nice about it, but you know something feels off. And that's a good way to tell if someone is lying, to just read energy, because energy doesn't lie. People lie. And people, like I said, aren't usually thinking about what they're putting out and taking in. They're very chaotic. They think that they can just say anything and do anything, and it's not going to have any consequences or effects. But we're all connected. We all share a planet, and we're all made of the same material. Everything you do comes back to you. Everything you do to other people affects you, and you can't get away from that truth. You can try, you can lie to yourself, you can live in a delusion, but you're eventually going to have to accept it, because you're just it's going to be overwhelming at some point. So that in itself is something to have faith in. Karma, just the idea that there isn't a way to get away with being cruel, and that it's not always up to you to take karma into your own hands. It's only your job really to stand up for one thing, which is what you believe in. You know, like, your job isn't to fight the devil, it's to stand up for God, if that makes sense. Like, just using that as a metaphor, I'm not saying literally believe in the devil and God, but it's less important to focus on what you're fighting and more important to focus on what you're fighting for and what you love and what you believe in. And you want to be loved. That's really, at the end of the day, that's what matters. So think about like that example I gave, where everyone hates you. And think about a situation that you've been in where maybe you felt like that. You felt like everyone was ganging up on you, and you didn't know what to do. You didn't know what to say. So think about what really matters in that situation. If you believe that you're ugly, if you believe that whatever it is, what do you want? Do you want everyone to tell you that you're beautiful? Do you want everyone to compliment you, or whatever it is? Do you want to feel good about yourself? What you really want, no matter what it is, you want love. And think about someone who is conventionally unattractive and someone who's conventionally attractive, where, you know, by most people's standards, one person is really pretty and the other one isn't. And think about if you just remember what you felt like when you were a baby. Babies are all the same. Babies, there's no such thing as an attractive baby and an ugly baby. It's a baby. And babies aren't thinking about that. Babies don't care about that. Babies only want one thing. They want to feel loved. They want to feel safe. And we value love and connection over everything else. There have been like scientific experiments with animals where the animal would choose connection, like a relationship with its mother, over something that it needs to survive, like food, because that is always going to be the most important, the top priority, because that's just in our nature. As living beings, as energy, we understand that we're all connected and that we're nothing without each other, and we know that that's always going to matter the most. And when we stray from that truth, when we start believing something else, that's when we start depriving ourselves of the energy and the food source that we need, which is love. And then we're depriving ourselves of love, then we're going to be starved of it, and then we're kind of going to be on that lower side of the like darker energy, and then we're going to be really out of control, not taking any responsibility for what we're putting in, because we're going to be taking a lot of other people's energy and feeling entitled to take and take and take, and that's how you end up in that situation. And not everyone who is feeding darker energy is doing that. Sometimes it only affects them. Sometimes they're just not happy, which is who this video is for. It's for people who want to be happier and don't really know why they feel so heavy, or like it's not worth being happy or being free or carefree like a child. And that's what children have that we as adults are missing, is that sense of peace and knowing that nothing matters except love. And we forget that. We know it on some level, but we kind of laugh at the idea. It's like, oh, love is going to save the world, because people often think of romantic love, and that's not the same thing. But children really carry a wisdom with them, and if you listen to them, I really don't like patronizing children. I think people do that way too often, and it drives me crazy seeing children get patronized for no reason. Because why? Because they're younger? Because they're in the process of learning? Well, so are you. Nobody's done learning. How would you like it if I talked down to you? If I talked to you like you weren't going to understand, or if I told you to do something and you said why and I just said because? Like, it's just disrespectful. And we do that to animals too. And I don't like it. But yeah, so basically just think about what your values are. What do you do in that situation? You say, you know what? It doesn't matter what I look like, it doesn't matter who I am, because as long as I know that I'm loved, I don't care about any of that. It doesn't matter. And I can dress up to make myself feel happy. I can have fun with it, but I'm not going to be stressed out about it because I know that I'm loved and I love myself. How do you get to that point? Because if you've reached that point, it doesn't matter how many people are coming at you and attacking you. You just understand that you shouldn't take anything personally, because everything, like at least 90% of what people do is just a reflection of their own issues. They're taking it out on you. And we learn this usually in our childhoods, but we forget because we get older, and then because we heard those things at such a young age, we kind of just put it in our mind as a cliche instead of a really important truth. But it is really important, because if you forget that, you're just you're not doing yourself any favors. You have to remember that people who attack you, people who say things that aren't kind, it's their own problem. It's their own issue. And you didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything to deserve it, because you would never do that to someone else. And if you would, what do you need? What are you ignoring? That's the question. What are you afraid to look at? So just do some shadow work. Take a look at yourself. See the dark parts of yourself, the dark parts of your past, the parts that you don't want to face, and focus on yourself instead of other people. Because if you're constantly going around blaming the rest of the world for your problems, like there's this customer who I've seen a couple times at my job, and she has a tendency to be in kind of a unpleasant mood, and she'll make it someone else's problem. Most recently this happened. She acknowledged it and she apologized. She said, it's not your fault. But she didn't do that the last time, and she made me feel like it was my fault. But then I thought, if I had just done that to someone and I walked out of the building, I would have been thinking, oh my God, that was so embarrassing. I can't believe I just did that. That's so childish. I feel like, you know, the poor person who I just did that to, I like I can't believe I just did that. That wasn't me. And then I would go back in and I would apologize, because I would be in apologizing, I would be trying to rebuild a connection and say, you know what, that wasn't me. I'm really sorry, and I hope you know that I didn't mean it. Because the truth is that when you do things like that, you never mean it. It's just a question of whether or not you're going to acknowledge that and admit it to other people and to yourself first. But most people don't, because they're afraid, because they're just kind of they're burnt out, really. I mean, they're just kind of like out of it, because like I said, we are in a culture that encourages a lot of these things that deplete our energy, and make people too exhausted to want to do any work on themselves, so they just don't really take any responsibility. But you're supposed to learn this stuff in your childhood. You're supposed to learn that kids do this all the time. Kids do that. They'll say stuff that they don't mean. They'll say really mean, horrible things, and then they'll be like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," because the real kid comes out. And kids have no problem with that. Kids don't mind with acknowledging that they did something wrong, because kids aren't concerned with large scale things of, am I a bad person and do I deserve to be punished? Is it scary to admit that I did something wrong? Kids aren't thinking about what they did wrong. They're just thinking about what they want to do right. They're only thinking about love. They're only thinking about the people that they're apologizing to, and they're not thinking at all about what it says about them that they did something wrong in the first place. They're just thinking about the relationships that they want to mend, that they damaged by being thoughtless and careless. So you learn this as a child, and then you carry it into your adulthood, and that's how you mature. But the problem is that a lot of people don't learn that in their childhood, or they learn it but they associate it with their parents forcing them to do it, so it's never authentic, and they kind of do it with like a bitter foot stomping attitude of I'm sorry, and they don't really mean it. And and then they grow up into adults and they're like, finally nobody can tell me what to do, and then they just walk around thinking that they can walk into stores and talk to retail clerks and tell them like like it's their fault that they're not having a good day, and never look back on it and say, I really shouldn't have done that. Because when there's no reflection, there's no growth, which means that you're not really moving. You're just kind of a person existing and taking up space. And we all need to be constantly growing and evolving. If we ever are stagnant, there's really no reason for us to even be here. We have to be moving forward. And most of us just get stuck. We get stagnant. And we have to help each other move forward. We have to stop judging each other for where we are. And it's so easy to look at someone and say, oh, you're wrong, you did that, you're acting like a child. And yeah, that lady who I was talking about was acting like a child, and it was wrong. But I'm not judging her for that. I'm not going to make her feel like she's a bad person. I'm just using her as an example because it's something that a lot of us do. I've done it, but I acknowledge it when I do it. And I'm not saying that makes me better than her. It just means she has the ability to do that too. And I would like to encourage her to do that. I'd like to encourage you to do it. But everyone's at a different point in their growth, in their journey. And when you start being cynical and judging people as good or bad, you're not really giving them a chance to do anything. And you're not acknowledging that you could have been there just as easily, that you probably were there at one point in your own growth journey and you just don't remember it. But we all have free will, we all make decisions. Some of us don't make the greatest decisions, but if you are judging people, you're part of the problem, and just by judging someone, you're automatically a hypocrite. It's okay to hate things that were done to you. It's okay to hate situations, and it's okay to not forgive someone for something that they did to you, to not forget. But in terms of forgiving, you have to remember that eventually you need to let go of it and not feel responsible for it. Like you could say that's that person's problem. It's not. I don't have anything to do with it. And then you just let it go and you move on with your own life. You still remember it, but you don't like hold a grudge in the sense that you're like actively thinking about them or you actively hate them. You just haven't forgotten. and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think in general, the main thing I want to remind you of is that there's nothing wrong with anything that you get hard on yourself for, the things that you're like trying to do it right, do it the right way. If the right way, if all the suggestions ever seem like too much, if it's ever too hard, don't put pressure on yourself. Remember that the only thing that really matters is how you treat yourself and how you treat other people, and that you're being honest about where you are and not judgmental. And if you focus on that, everything else should fall into place. So I feel like there's more to say, but I've been talking for almost 40 minutes, so I'm gonna let it go. And thank you for watching. This was, I think this was better than last week's. Last week really just went on and on for no reason. But it wasn't a bad video. In all my videos, there's something worth hearing, I think. Not to sound arrogant, I don't want to sound like I'm saying, oh, I have all this good information, but I don't know, like, I often am sharing things that I learned that I'm like, wow, that was awesome, I'm really glad I learned that, and then I want to share it with you in my own way, instead of just regurgitating the information. I share my understanding of it and what I do with it. And I often use real examples of my own life. Like when I think about my own problem, this video is honestly for people who are in a similar position to me, because I could use some of the advice that I'm giving, but I'm still kind of going through it, so I don't know. Maybe it was too early to make this video. Maybe I'll do a part 2 after I've kind of taken my own advice. I did try making a schedule last week, but I ended up giving up on that after the first day because I realized that everything on the schedule was things that I would do anyway, and it didn't matter, and it felt pointless to have a structured time that I was supposed to do it. It's sort of like filling my car with gas and having nowhere to go. It just felt meaningless. So I'm not really giving advice in that sense. I'm just kind of telling you what it felt like. Yeah, so it didn't work, but that doesn't mean that it isn't a good idea. I said that I was going to tell you next week how that went. I'm not ready for it. And I think that sometimes we are in situations where we feel like we can do what needs to be done to get where we want to be, but we're just not in the right place to do anything. So it just feels like there's no reason to move yet. And maybe the solution for that is just patience. I don't know. I honestly don't know. But when I figure it out, I'll tell you, because I'm always keeping you in the loop of what's going on in my life. I'm always stressed before I make these videos because I wait until my last chance to do it, and I don't have an idea, or I had an idea and then I forgot it. So I think I need to be a little bit more on top of it so that I film it earlier in the week. And then I'll have a video ready, and then maybe I can even be 2 weeks ahead of myself. That would be good. So we'll see what I talk about next week. Hopefully it's interesting. If I film it before, like a week before I upload it, it probably won't be about what I'm going through at that point in my life, and it'll more just be about a topic that I want to talk about, which should be more interesting for you. So yeah. Thank you for watching. See you next week. And I don't know what else to say. I wish I had an outro. Cow on the rain hole, because what does that mean?